from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Our program today is going to address a book titled Work and the Human Spirit. We're very pleased to welcome to our program John Shear. In reviewing his book, I was excited about the possibility of bringing this program to you. I am showing you a copy of the book that I just mentioned on the air. In this book, our guest has a lot of case studies. In fact, at the beginning of the book, he describes this particular work by saying this book is a collection of little stories, small dramas that revolve around a common theme. Exactly what to label the theme, I don't know, but I think he's done a good job. John, welcome to the program. We're delighted to have you here, and I want to tell our guests that what we're really talking about from the perspective that I understand about your work, that you're talking about the body, the mind, and the spirit, particularly how we deal with inner self in relationship to our workplace. And I should also share with the viewers that you do a lot of workshops for major corporations in this country. Earl Good, who's the president of the East Area GTE telephone operations, said of your work that John has captured the essence of real change in an individual or an organization. It begins with the inner self. I think that's a good way to sum this up. And I also want to tell our viewers that you hold a BA degree in history and philosophy from Roanoke College in 1962. You also attended the U.S. Naval Officer Candidate School in Newport, Rhode Island. You also hold a master's in divinity from the Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary in Columbia, South Carolina, received in 1970. You've done postgraduate doctoral program work at Cornell University, and presently you're working on your PhD at Greenwich University. And we know you're doing an awful lot of consulting, a lot of workshops, and thank you for taking time to come and to examine your works with us. We're most appreciative. And I'm pleased to have our regular panel. First of all is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who serves as the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And to get into this very exciting topic, we shall invite Janelle Burke to commence the questioning.
Well, Tony has given us somewhat of a rundown on your work, but can you share with our viewers what really is your thesis behind your work?
Oh boy, I can't remember a time in my life when the essence of this work wasn't really at the center of my life. As I think about it, I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, literally in my grandfather's parsonage. He was a Lutheran pastor in Richmond, and I grew up in the church parsonage, which is located right by the church. And he used to see people who would come in the front door upset about something, and I would be maybe 8 or 9 years old playing in the front hall, and I'd see these people come in the door upset. They'd go into his office with him for an hour or so and come out with smiles on their faces. And I'd think, what is he doing in there? What is going on in there? And I think at a very, very young age, the whole concept of change and of positive change and transformation of people's lives was really imprinted on me. And so over the years, I think what's happened in my life is that drive, that impetus, that yearning to be a source of that kind of change, of positive change, has just worked its way through my life. So it started with individuals and went to families and then went to large organizations. So who knows where it'll go next.
John, maybe we can illustrate some of the points that I think are in your book. I haven't had the chance to read it yet, but I'm going to. And I'm going to draw from a monogram of yours that I enjoyed a lot. Tell us the story about Asa, your son, and the ducks. I think that's an interesting point.
That story really illustrates how when we view the world, we actually don't see the world very often the way it really is. We have our filters, we have our expectations, we have our history through which we view the world. And Piaget, the famous French-Swiss child educator, said, when we teach the child the name of the bird, the child loses the bird. Well, Asa and I were out in the front yard when he was a little boy, 2 years old or something, and we're under a flyway in Spokane. The ducks came over, and he looks up and he looks at those ducks going over, and I said, Asa, those are ducks. And he says, ducks, And a couple days later, we're out there, and the ducks fly over again. He looks up and he says, "Ducks, Daddy, ducks." And now when they fly over, he just looks up and he doesn't even see those ducks anymore. He sees duckness. You know, he gets just enough information so his mind puts a label on it, ducks, and then he no longer sees that particular mallard or that particular drake, whatever. He sees the concept duck, and we do that with people. We wake up in the morning, look up spouse, check. You know, it's we have these people made up, and we have labels put on them, and after a very short period of time, we're really not seeing who's there, whether it's a boss or an employee or one of our kids or a spouse. We're really seeing the story that we've made up about them, and it makes it real hard to get things done in the world.
Now take that a little farther for us, if you would, please, and tell us about your theory about how beliefs affect perception and how those two things are key to any kind of real change or transformation in people or in organizations.
A lot of what people attempt to do in their own lives and in organizations to bring about change is really what one of my clients calls charm school. It's a superficial kind of working on what shows on the outside. So we spend a lot of time and money in this country, in the business world and elsewhere, learning tips and techniques for how to do things better. The dilemma is that all those tips and techniques, in a sense, are like wallpaper. They're papering over what's already there. Well, I'm much more interested in who is the person inside and of what use are they going to make of those tips and techniques. You can take a manager who hasn't worked out a lot of their own issues and give them some new skills, and they just become new weapons, in a sense, to use for the same old purposes. So in order for real change to occur, it has to occur, we believe, from the inside out. And that's at the level of your deepest beliefs, not like thoughts, but it's almost like, what do you, quote, know is true about yourself? What do you know is true about other people? What do you know is true about life? And those fundamental beliefs actually drive the way you think, and they affect the way you view the world.
Thank you.
So if you want change to occur from our point of view, that's where you need to start.
John, I'm going to have you to elaborate upon this whole process. I want to quote, if I may, from your book. I think that these two examples really stimulate conversation, and then getting to this whole question of what's going on in institutional organizations and how those may be affecting the inner self or vice versa. I'm thinking of the movie Rollerball when I look at your work, where this person became like a machine through how he was used. Anyway, two very powerful examples here in your book. One, you say, of the young fast tracker who used his Harvard MBA to land the dream job, only to learn that after 4 or 5 months, I absolutely hated it. Nevertheless, he stayed with the dream until we met him in his mid-30s, a man with everything he had hoped for, but nothing he wanted. And then a lady that you use as an example, and you work with so many people, you say, of the executive's wife who after 29 years of marriage suddenly found herself hospitalized for acute depression. When her husband was transferred for the 12th time, she told us of the deep love she and her mate shared, of his valiant efforts to be provider, husband, and father, only to have his daughter at one point give up on having an intimate relationship with him, and his son think of him as the man in the living room behind the newspaper. What is the message about what is wrong and what are we going to do?
That I actually have spoken to both those people in the last 2 weeks. What happens to us, I think, when we go to work is, and there are exceptions to this, but not many in my experience, is that the job, oh, by the way, the word job comes from the Old English word gob, G-O-B-B-E, and it means a lump. And so if you have a job, you have a lump of something, and it it doesn't sound all that palatable. And in the old days, you actually did have what was called piecework, and you were paid by the lump that you produced, whether it was coal or sewing or whatever the product was. And so when you get a job, what can happen gradually over time without our even realizing it is that we begin to make ourselves fit into what we think we need to be like in order to be promoted or accepted or successful on the job. And where some part of ourselves maybe doesn't fit with that, we will try to talk ourselves out of that. We will deny that aspect of ourselves. So we have people, ironically, like these people, and there are 9 examples in the book, of people who found their way to the top, and once they got there, they realized that they had cut off their arm and their leg and their soul. We had a person in our intensive a few weeks ago that just broke my heart when he said, I get up in the morning. This is an executive probably in his middle 40s. He said, I get up in the morning, and the only way that I can go out the door to work is I get up in the morning, I unzip my chest, I take my heart out, I put it on the bureau, I beat it until it's numb, I put it back in my chest, zip it up, and go to work. Now obviously not every company's like that, not every person's like that, but there are many, many people out there for whom some variation of that is the case, that they have had to deny who they are in order, they believe, in order to get promoted to the point where they really aren't bringing much of who they are. What we work on is, can you bring all of who you are to everything you do? Because if you can't bring more of who you are to everything you do, then what's it for? What's it for? You die, and then somebody puts on your tombstone, this person was able to produce 20 more widgets for his corporation. Really, what's it about?
So what you're really saying here is that there is, if I understand the perception, is that it's a two-way mirror.
It's a polarity that has to be
Yes.
managed, absolutely.
What it does to the individual and the destruction of the individual, and there comes the example of the depression the lady had, or unhappiness, I would say could lead to physical illness.
Sure.
And the second component is that what is the corporation or the college or wherever the workplace is doing to the individual, and also in the end, does the organization really benefit from this approach to the workplace? Great
question. Where do you want me to start?
Just take it and run with it. Yeah.
A couple thoughts. One is that there are many, many people who have found a way to bring their heart and soul to their work, and those people are bright lights, and you know them. If I asked you to make a list, you could sit down right now and write down a list of people that you know that strike you that way. They're just alive. They're full of life. They bring everything to the job. They're effective. They get things done. You enjoy being around them, that kind of thing. So it can be done. This is not a hopeless task. The question is, what are those people on to? What have they? What's the little thing that they've figured out or been blessed with, or had something happen to them to figure that out? What organizations can do, let's say, is they can begin to, first of all, be interested in what's happening to the human spirit of the people at work. That's the first step. It's when people come in the door, they're not just hands coming in the door. There's a heart, there's a mind, there's a spirit, there's the essence of who they are. That's a very interesting thing to think about. What could we do in this organization to nurture, to cultivate, to unleash, would be our word, to unleash the human spirit around here? And the organizations that are able to do that are just extraordinary places to work. They're the kind of places you want to go and do business with. They're the kind of stores you want to go to. It just shines. But I don't think that we're yet able to draw any kind of, and I don't think we'll ever be able to draw any kind of a cause and effect relationship between opening up and enlivening the human spirit of the workforce and a direct correlation to the bottom line. I believe it's there, but I think that if you do it for that reason, then you're really missing the whole point. That you need to do it, as I say in the book, for its own sake. It's just like the tennis player, who plays tennis to win. Okay, great. That means you have to play for 2 hours, and then when you see the scoreboard, you get to decide whether you enjoyed yourself or not. Isn't that a shame? They missed the whole tennis match. Well, that's the way it is for a lot of people at work. So if you do this for just to get a score at the end, then you've missed the whole game of life, basically. Why not live every day, every moment, every meeting, every phone call, all out, 110%, be fully present, and let the score take care of itself?
Thank you. Janelle.
Did I answer all? There were several questions you asked.
Yeah.
Did I hit them enough?
I guess I could take this one step further. I just don't want to totally dominate, although I'm fascinated with the subject. It seems to me that what you're also saying for both the organization and the individual and all those who are connected and community and so forth, if we could learn this formula, it would be a win-win for everyone.
Absolutely. No question in my mind. My life's dedicated to that proposition.
Thank you, Janelle Burke.
I suppose you're familiar with the comic strip Dilbert.
Oh, I love it.
And
Read it every day.
that seems to be saying something about contemporary life, of course. And there are many, many organizations that are downsizing the whole management scheme, and a good number of people go to work every day being fearful, probably, as to what's going to happen to the company they work for, and not knowing is worse than knowing. So how do you begin to approach this problem when people know that it's going to happen? It's just a question of when.
Great question. Go ahead. Was there another one attached to it?
No, that's it. How do you approach this?
I remember a couple of years ago I was walking down the green concourse in the Minneapolis airport. It's vivid. I can still see it. And you know how they'll put the magazines up on the racks and they'll have like 25 copies, and it was a Time magazine. It was a red cover, and it said, "Is your job safe?" And I'm carrying my computer and my suitcase, and I stopped dead in the middle of the concourse, and I looked at that thing, and the first thought that hit me was, that's the wrong question. And then I thought to myself, well, what would the right question be? Because the question, is your job safe? The answer to that is absolutely no. The right question, or a better question, would be, are you safe regardless of what happens to your job? And that's the question that people need to address, is what do I base my safety on? What do I base my sense of worth, my sense of okayness, or whatever you want to call it? And to the extent that we are identified with our job and believe that that's who we are, that I am my job, or I am what people say about me inside this organization, or I am the success I have in moving through the hierarchy, then we're in deep yogurt, because the chances, I work in large corporations and small businesses, and in one case, the president of a huge corporation, 50,000 people, was speaking to the executive team, and I was in the room, and he said, we're about to go into a re-engineering effort here, and I only know of 2 jobs that are safe, and it's this person who's running the re-engineering effort and the chairman of the board, and I'm not even too sure about my job. And everybody kind of kind of laughed around the room, and a month later he was gone. So there isn't really any place anymore where you can be safe. So I have four suggestions. If we get a chance, I'll tell you about how to.
Why don't you tell us those 4 suggestions?
First thing is to recognize that your job is not safe, and just accept that. Okay, don't wish for it to be any other way. In a battle with reality, bet on reality, basically. Okay, so your job is not safe. The second, these are unavoidable facts of life, we call them. The second unavoidable fact of life is that neither is anything else safe, and never has been, in case you look back on it. I mean, people get sick, we die, we have accidents. Well, if that's the case, the third unavoidable fact of life is that whatever you have been doing up to now to cope with the changes in life may not be sufficient. That we are now approaching a time when there's such uncertainty and such change that all the things that you used to be able to sort of bank on as navigating points may not be trustworthy anymore. If you think about it, the institutions that we used to count on are undulating, they're moving. So what do we do? What do we navigate off of? So we say that the fourth unavoidable fact of life is that you need to get yourself on a path of development of your inner self, your human spirit, however you want to say it. That you need to get about seeing life as a classroom. And this is all the curriculum, and these people you have to work with are your faculty members, so you might as well get on about the business of taking what comes, whether it's good or bad, and using it for your own growth and development.
John, you may have just answered the question I was going to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. You've got a great mission in life, especially for where we are, because in Western culture it's pretty undeniable that people draw a lot of their sense of self-worth from their job. You're saying that we ought to replace that with this development of inner self. Can you tell us a little bit more about that inner self and what it is?
There are three kind of arenas that as human beings, this goes back to Freud, believe it or not. I mean, I couldn't believe it. Freud said something this sort of profound and humanistic, but he said that there are 3 places where people have problems. They have problems with themselves, problems with other people, and problems with life in general. There's a sweet spot right in the center of those 3. If you imagine like 3 circles, there's a sweet spot, like when you hit a racket, hit a ball in the center spot, where when I am holding those 3 things, when I am in a sense doing what is really being called for, that doesn't deny me, doesn't deny the other person, and doesn't deny what the situation is calling for. If I can ask myself the question, what could I do in this moment, in this moment, in this moment, which would be true to what I know of my own essence, which would be true to what I know about you and what you're up to in the world, and would be true to what life seems to be calling for in this moment. What could I do in that moment? The more I can ask myself those questions, the more I'm, in a sense, hitting the sweet spot. And that's what people call being in the zone. Athletes talk about it. And I'll go for sometimes an hour or two in that zone. And sometimes I have attacks. I'm only in it for a moment. But it's a wonderful way to live and to work with people.
Let me ask a somewhat related question. Would it be your contention that it is possible for most people to be happy in most jobs, or should we be looking for the right match? I heard a gentleman say once in advising young people, find what you love and then do that as a career. Which camp are you in?
Well, it's both. We have a saying that we put on the wall in our intensive that says a midlife crisis is when you get to the top of your ladder only to realize you may have leaned it against the wrong wall. There are certain kinds of work that just aren't right for some people, and they got into it because they're, somebody told them to do it, or they thought they should be in it, and they got locked into the golden parachute and they can't get out, and so forth. But I take the position that my happiness, your happiness, ultimately isn't directly connected to whatever's happening in the circumstances. Richard Bach, who wrote Jonathan Seagull, said, if your happiness depends on what somebody else does, you've got a real problem. So to the extent that my happiness is dependent on having a certain kind of job, then I need to and we keep doing this. Well, let's try this job. Let's try this job. Let's try this marriage partner. Let's try this marriage partner. We keep looking for something outside of ourselves to make us happy. And I think that joy is not the result of something, but it's a starting point. You have to bring your happiness and satisfaction to life. It doesn't come, it can come when good things happen. It feels good, but that's a fleeting thing that comes and goes. You make the sale, you feel great. What I'm talking about is a happiness that comes from knowing who you are or learning who you are and bringing that to what you do.
Tony, if you'll allow me to ask one more quick question. It's somewhat related, although it sounds like it might be very much different. Again, referring back to your article, you talk about getting outside the box, and looking for decisions or solutions that aren't in a range of possibilities we normally consider. Could you explain a little bit about that?
We develop, companies do this, and individuals do this, families do this. Over a period of time, we develop ways of approaching things that are familiar to us. And you can think of them as like dots on a graph, and they're very dense in here. And as we get out here, we don't really know too much, so we're a little uneasy out here. And the irony of it is that when we confront a problem in our life, a real challenge, and it won't go away immediately, we keep trying to do all the stuff that's familiar to us. And if that doesn't work, then we come to the conclusion that this problem can't be solved. And the solution may be out here somewhere in this no man's land or no woman's land, sort of the DMZ, out there in the abyss where we really don't know what to do. So the first step quite often in producing a breakthrough is simply to admit, just like AA says, in this case, I don't know what to do. And that's a very tough thing for people in corporations or school systems to admit, I don't know what to do, but it's the first step toward having a breakthrough.
You mentioned Bach, and I love his works. Certainly one thing that we learned from the message from Jonathan Living Seagull is that when one gets in touch with inner self and also wishes to strive to be that complete person, that it may be a tremendous challenge with the environment which you're in, but it pays remarkable dividends. Would you not say that's part of what you're saying?
Absolutely. There are people that are in very difficult... You can have two people in the same organization, and maybe that organization is really a tough place to work. And one of them goes home depressed and unhappy and has an ulcer, and the one sitting right beside them. I was, I don't want to name the company, but I was consulting back in Boston a few years ago with a company that produced products, and they went by an assembly line, and I was talking with the people on the assembly line, and one woman just happy, fixing these things, talking with everybody, and just visiting with her friends, and all day long, 8 hours a day, she just put 3 or 4 screws in this thing, and I said to her, how in the world can you do this 8 hours a day? And she said, honey child, can you believe that they're paying me $15 an hour just to sit here and I can think about whatever I want to think about and say whatever I want to say? She had found a way to make that job a delight for her. And right across the assembly line was a woman that looked like, she was getting kicked in the stomach, So the human spirit can prevail. It just requires an intentionality and a desire. I think you'll find out. You know, Jesus said, "Seek and you shall find." If you're looking for reasons to be down, boy, you can sure find them.
Something else that you talked about, and there's a lot of philosophers and life and throughout history that have gone different directions, and sometimes we've bought into certain philosophies, and others, like you, maybe are challenging those. I was interested and intrigued by your comments that one of the things that might have been negative in society is that this idea that the body is separated, the physical body is separated from the mind, and that these are, but you're saying the body, mind, and spirit are all integrally tied together.
Absolutely.
Is that part of how we've lost our focus?
You bet. We have, we take pills. In fact, my kids now, they're like 9 and 12. They'll see an ad on TV and for an aspirin or something. I don't want to get in trouble here, but they'll say, treat the pain, not the problem. You know, I mean, so they've learned that a lot of what comes in the way of advertising is really working on the symptoms and not the root issue. A lot of what we think of everything, if we can trust what's happening in science now, every thought and every feeling that we have manifests in some way at the cellular level. So over time, if you have a continuous thought or continuous emotion, it will, in a sense, begin to build up some sort of consequence at the cellular level. That manifests in how you can see people that are carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. I mean, physically, it's just reflected in our bodies. So we are definitely a body, mind, spirit continuum. And when we split one off or split them off and separate them, then we end up treating one as if it's not connected with the other. We get in a lot of trouble.
Certainly, there's some evidence to be so supportive. Medical doctors will tell you that through worry and tension that you can secrete more acid, and that's an explanation of ulcers. And
absolutely.
So that there's really specific
absolutely.
evidence.
My doctor tells me that 80% of the patients that he sees have illnesses which are either caused by or exacerbated by some kind of psychological or emotional or interpersonal situation.
One final question. We're running out of time, but
gracious, we're just getting started here.
We'll have you back. I hear you also saying that no matter what environment that you're in, as the example you gave in the factory, one can, if one's in touch with self, can move above certain maybe detrimental things in that environment.
Absolutely. And if this is true for anybody, but you have to want to, and this is the key. And how do you get to that place where you really want to enjoy life and you want to make a positive difference? And that's an important first step.
On that note, I have to bring the program to conclusion. John Shearer, on behalf of the panel and staff, we thank you for being here to discuss your book, work, and the human spirit, and we will invite you back another time. It's been a most stimulating conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this program as much as we have enjoyed bringing it to you, and I would invite you to be with us again next week at the same time when we shall discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.